The dusty gravel crunched under her boots as Lisa walked through the crowded livestock auction yard. The smell of hay and animals filled the air, mixed with the chatter of ranchers and farmers who had come to buy and sell. She had been training horses for almost 15 years now, and this monthly auction was usually where she found her next project. But today felt different somehow. Lisa pulled her worn baseball cap down to shield her eyes from the bright morning sun. Her small ranch back home had 3 horses already, and honestly, she wasn't even sure she could afford another one. But something had drawn her here today, like an invisible string pulling her forward. The auction was in full swing. She watched as beautiful quarter horses and strong work animals were led into the ring, each one bringing good money from eager bidders. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the yard, calling out prices that made Lisa wince. These animals were way out of her price range. As she walked toward the back pens, hoping to find something more affordable, the noise of the auction faded behind her. Back here, the atmosphere was quieter, sadder somehow. This was where they kept the animals that nobody really wanted. The ones that were too old, too sick, or too broken to bring good money. Lisa stopped walking when she saw him. In the farthest corner pen stood a horse that must have once been magnificent. Even now, in his current state, she could see the noble lines of his head, the powerful build that spoke of good breeding. But his ribs showed clearly through his dull, patchy coat. His head hung low, almost touching the ground, and his eyes seemed to stare at nothing. A small, faded tag on the pen read, Lot 847, Thunder. No age, no history, just a name and a number. Lisa moved closer to the fence. The horse didn't even look up at her approach. She had seen broken horses before, but something about this one hit her differently. Maybe it was the way he stood so still, like he had given up on everything. Or maybe it was the fact that despite his condition, she could still see traces of the proud animal he must have been. Don't waste your time on that one, honey. Lisa turned to see an older man in a cowboy hat leaning against the next pen over. His weathered face showed the kind of experience that came from decades of working with horses. Been watching him all morning, the man continued, shaking his head. Won't even lift his head when people walk by. That's a sure sign of a horse that's done. Probably hasn't got more than a few months left in him, if you ask me. Lisa nodded politely but turned back to look at Thunder. The man meant well, she knew that. In this business, you learn to spot the horses that were worth investing in and the ones that weren't. This horse clearly fell into the second category, but as she stood there watching him, something strange happened. For just a moment, Thunder lifted his head slightly. It wasn't much, just a few inches, but for that brief second, Lisa caught a glimpse of his eyes. They weren't completely empty like she had first thought. There was something there, buried deep under layers of pain and defeat. But still there. It reminded her of her very first rescue horse, a mare named Star, who had been badly neglected. Everyone had told her that Star was hopeless too, but Lisa had spent months working with her, and eventually Star had become one of the best therapy horses she had ever known. Star had taught her that sometimes the most broken things just needed someone to believe in them. The auction was moving through the lots quickly now. Lisa knew that Thunder's turn would come soon. She also knew that when it did, there probably wouldn't be many people interested in bidding. Horses in his condition usually went for very little money, often to people who would use them for parts or put them down immediately. The thought made her stomach turn. Lisa walked back toward the main auction ring, but she couldn't get Thunder out of her mind. She found herself calculating numbers in her head. She had about $500 in her savings account that she had been planning to use for repairs on her barn roof. The roof could wait another month or two, she reasoned. Maybe when Lot 847 was finally called, Lisa found herself raising her hand before she could think too hard about it. The auctioneer barely paused before calling out the opening bid. We have $50. Do I hear 75? Lisa looked around. Nobody else seemed interested. The crowd was already starting to thin out as the day wore on, and most of the serious buyers had gotten what they came for earlier. 50 going once, going twice. 100, Lisa called out. surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. A few people turned to look at her with expressions that ranged from curious to pitying. She heard someone behind her mutter something about city people who don't know better. "$250," came another voice from across the ring. Lisa's heart sank a little. She looked over to see who was bidding against her and recognized the man immediately. Joe Peterson owned a large operation that bought horses primarily for meat processing. It wasn't something Lisa liked to think about, but she knew it was part of the business. "$300," she said quickly. Joe looked at her for a moment, seemed to weigh whether this particular horse was worth fighting over, and then shrugged and turned away. At Thunder's current weight, he probably wouldn't bring much money anyway. $300 going once, going twice, sold to the lady in the blue cap. Just like that, Thunder was hers. As Lisa filled out the paperwork and arranged for transportation, several people approached her with advice. Most of it wasn't very encouraging. "You know, dear, that horse has been through at least 3 different owners in the past year," said an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Johnson. "Each one thought they could fix him up, and each one gave up after a few weeks. Sometimes horses just get too broken to put back together." A younger man, who worked at a nearby ranch, was more direct. "I hope you didn't pay too much for him. Honestly, the kindest thing you could do is probably put him out of his misery right away. Save yourself the heartache and the vet bills." Lisa nodded and smiled politely at each piece of advice, but inside she was starting to second-guess herself. What if they were right? What if she had just spent money she couldn't really afford on a horse that was beyond help? What if she was being naive and sentimental instead of practical? But as she walked back to take one more look at Thunder before the trailer arrived, she found him in exactly the same position as before. Head down, eyes vacant, completely still, except for one small difference. This time, when she approached the fence, his ear twitched slightly in her direction. It was such a tiny movement that she almost missed it. But it was there. Some part of him was still aware, still responding to the world around him. And if there was even a small part of him left, maybe that was enough to work with. The trailer ride home was quiet. Thunder didn't fight the loading, which worried Lisa more than if he had resisted. Healthy horses usually showed some reaction to being moved to new places. But Thunder seemed completely indifferent to everything happening around him. When they arrived at her small ranch, Lisa led Thunder to the paddock she had prepared for him. It was separated from her other horses so he could have peace and quiet. While he adjusted, she had put fresh hay in the stall and filled the water trough. Thunder walked into the paddock without resistance and immediately went to the far corner, where he resumed his statue-like pose. Lisa stood watching him for a while, wondering what she had gotten herself into. Her neighbor Frank was fixing his fence on the other side of the property line. She could see him glancing over occasionally, and she knew he would have opinions about her newest addition. Frank had been raising horses for 30 years and had very definite ideas about which animals were worth the trouble. As the sun started to set, Lisa gave Thunder one last check. He hadn't touched the hay or water. He stood in exactly the same spot where she had left him hours earlier, walking back to her house. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that she had either made the biggest mistake of her life or was about to discover something amazing. Only time would tell which one it was. The phone rang at 7 in the morning, 3 days after Lisa brought Thunder home. She was already up, preparing breakfast for her horses, but the early call surprised her. "Lisa, honey, it's your mom. I just heard from Betty at the grocery store about what you did at the auction." Lisa sighed and balanced the phone between her shoulder and ear while she continued measuring out grain. Small towns were like that. News traveled faster than wildfire, especially when people thought you had done something foolish. "Mom, it's not as bad as people are making it sound. $300 for a horse that can barely stand? Lisa, that's grocery money for 2 months. You know how tight things have been since you started the ranch." Her mother wasn't wrong. Lisa had been living on a shoestring budget ever since she left her office job in the city to follow her dream of training horses. Every dollar mattered, and $300 was a significant chunk of her savings. "I know, Mom, but sometimes you have to follow your gut. Your gut doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart. After hanging up, Lisa walked out to check on Thunder. He stood in the exact same corner of the paddock where she had left him the night before. The hay she had put out remained untouched, and the water level in his trough hadn't dropped even an inch. "Morning, boy," she said softly, approaching the fence. Thunder's ears didn't even twitch in acknowledgement, the sound of a truck rumbling up. Her driveway interrupted the quiet morning. Lisa recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to Frank, her neighbor and the most respected horse trainer in the county. If Frank was coming over this early, it probably wasn't just for a friendly chat. Frank climbed out of his truck slowly. At 62, he moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had taken a beating from decades of working with large animals. He walked over to where Lisa stood by Thunder's paddock, his weathered face serious. "Morning, Lisa. Thought I'd come take a look at your new project." Frank leaned against the fence and studied Thunder for a long moment. Lisa watched his face, hoping to see some flicker of approval or encouragement. Instead, his expression grew. "More concerned? How long has he been standing like that?" Frank asked. "Since yesterday evening. He hasn't moved, hasn't eaten, hasn't drunk any water?" Frank shook his head slowly. "Lisa, I've been training horses since before you were born. I've seen a lot of broken animals come through this valley. This one." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This one looks like he's already given up. But he's only been here 3 days. Maybe he just needs time to adjust." "Time?" Frank's voice was gentle but firm. "Honey, a horse that won't eat or drink isn't adjusting. That's a horse that's shutting down. Look at his posture, his breathing. He's not fighting anymore, and when a horse stops fighting, that's usually the end." Lisa felt her stomach drop, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you might want to call Doc Martinez sooner rather than later. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for an animal is let them go peacefully." After Frank left, Lisa sat on her porch step, staring out at Thunder. The morning sun was getting warmer, but the horse hadn't moved to find shade. He just stood there like a statue, completely disconnected from the world around him. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her brother. "Mike, heard about your new horse? Want me to come take a look this weekend?" Mike lived 2 hours away. In the city, but he had grown up on their grandfather's ranch. He knew horses well enough to have opinions, and Lisa was pretty sure she knew what those opinions would be. By afternoon, word had spread even further. When Lisa went into town to pick up some supplies at the feed store, she felt like everyone was watching her. The clerk, a young man named Danny who had always been friendly, seemed awkward as he rang up her purchase. "So, I heard you bought Thunder from the Peterson auction," he said, avoiding eye contact. "That's right. My dad says he knew that horse when he was younger. Used to be a real champion, apparently. Won some big competitions before whatever happened to him." This was the first Lisa had heard about Thunder's past. "What kind of competitions?" "Show jumping, I think. Dad said he was incredible to watch. Could clear jumps that seemed impossible. But then there was some kind of accident and the horse was never the same." Danny handed her the receipt and finally looked up. "For what it's worth, I think it's nice that someone cares enough to try. Even if—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Lisa knew what he meant, "even if it's hopeless." The next morning, Lisa's veterinarian, Dr. Martinez, arrived for the examination she had scheduled. Carlos Martinez had been treating animals in the valley for 15 years, and his reputation for straight talk was well known. Lisa watched nervously as he approached Thunder's paddock. The horse still hadn't moved from his corner, and the untouched hay was starting to look dry and unappetizing. "Has he eaten anything at all?" Dr. Martinez asked as he opened his medical bag. "Not that I've seen. I've tried different types of hay, some grain, even carrots and apples. He won't touch any of it." Dr. Martinez entered the paddock slowly, speaking in low, calming tones. Thunder didn't react to his presence at all, which allowed the vet to conduct a thorough examination without any struggle. After 20 minutes, Dr. Martinez came back to where Lisa waited by the fence. His expression was serious. "Physically, he's undernourished and dehydrated, but There's nothing that couldn't be fixed with proper care and time. The problem is ... He paused, pulling off his gloves. The problem is that he doesn't seem to want to be fixed. What do you mean? Sometimes horses experience trauma that goes beyond the physical. They can develop a kind of depression, for lack of a better word. They lose interest in food, in other horses, in life itself. I've seen it before, usually in animals that have been through severe abuse or traumatic accidents. Lisa felt her heart sink. Is there anything we can do? We can try. Force feeding through a tube, 4 fluids to keep him hydrated. But Lisa, I have to be honest with you. In my experience, horses in this state rarely recover, and even if they do survive, they're often never the same. You could spend thousands of dollars and months of your life and still lose him in the end. That evening, Lisa called her best friend Rachel, who lived in the next town over. Rachel had been her emotional support through all the ups and downs of starting the ranch. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, Lisa confessed, sitting on her porch as the sun set behind the mountains. Maybe you are a little crazy, Rachel said with a laugh. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some of the best things in life require a little craziness. But what if they're right? What if I'm just prolonging his suffering? What does your gut tell you? Lisa looked out at Thunder, still standing motionless in his corner. Honestly, I don't know anymore. When I first saw him, I felt this connection like he was asking for help. But now I'm wondering if I was just projecting my own feelings onto him. Give it a little more time, but also be honest with yourself about when enough is enough. The next few days brought a steady stream of visitors, each with their own opinion about Thunder. The mailman stopped by to share a story about a horse he had known that went through something similar and never recovered. The woman who delivered propane mentioned that her uncle had spent a fortune trying to save a horse like Thunder, and it had nearly bankrupted him. Even the teenage girl who helped Lisa with weekend chores seemed worried. Miss Lisa, maybe Thunder doesn't want to get better. Maybe he's tired of being hurt and just wants to rest. By the end of the week, Lisa felt overwhelmed by the weight of everyone's concern and doubt. Part of her began to wonder if she was being selfish, keeping Thunder alive because she couldn't bear to give up, rather than because it was what was best for him. She stood by his paddock that Friday evening, watching him in his perpetual stillness. "What do you want me to do, boy?" she whispered. "Give me a sign, anything." Thunder remained motionless, offering no answers to her desperate question. The community's doubts were starting to feel like a heavy blanket, smothering her original confidence and making her question every decision she had made. Tomorrow, she decided, she would call Dr. Martinez again. Maybe it was time to seriously consider the option that everyone kept hinting at but nobody wanted to say out loud. Maybe the kindest thing really would be to let Thunder go. Lisa woke up before dawn on Saturday morning, her stomach twisted in knots. She had barely slept, thinking about her conversation with Dr. Martinez and all the well-meaning advice from her neighbors. Today, she had decided, would be the day she either saw some real progress with Thunder or seriously considered letting him go. She pulled on her boots and jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and headed out to the paddock. The morning air was crisp, and her breath formed small clouds in the cold. As she approached Thunder's corner, her heart sank. He stood in exactly the same position as always, like a living statue that someone had forgotten to move. "Good morning, boy," she said softly, even though she didn't expect any response, but something was different this morning. As Lisa got closer to the fence, she noticed that the water trough level had dropped slightly. Not much, maybe just a few sips, but it was the first sign that Thunder had done anything since arriving at her ranch. "Did you drink some water?" she asked, feeling a tiny spark of hope. Thunder's ears twitched almost imperceptibly, and Lisa's heart jumped. It was such a small movement that she might have imagined it, but she chose to believe it was real. She spent the next hour sitting on a hay bale outside his paddock, just talking to him. She told him about her day, about the other horses on her ranch, about her dreams of turning the place into a therapy center for both animals and people who needed healing. "You know, Thunder, I used to work in an office in the city," she said, watching his face for any sign of interest. I wore a suit every day and sat behind a computer for 9 hours. I was miserable, but I thought that was just how life was supposed to be. She paused, noticing that Thunder's breathing seemed slightly less labored than before. Then my grandfather left me this place. Everyone thought I was crazy to give up a steady paycheck to come out here and work with horses. Maybe they were right about the crazy part, but I've never been happier. Even on the hard days. When she finished her one-sided conversation, Lisa went to prepare breakfast for her other horses. As she worked, she kept glancing back at Thunder, hoping to catch him moving or eating, but he remained still as stone. Later that morning, her brother Mike arrived with his wife Jennifer and their 2 young kids. Lisa had been dreading this visit, knowing that Mike would have strong opinions about Thunder. "Where's this famous horse we've been hearing about?" Mike asked as he climbed out of his truck. Lisa led them over to Thunder's paddock. Mike studied the horse for a long moment, his face growing more concerned with each passing second. "Lisa, he looks terrible. Are you sure keeping him alive is the right thing to do?" "He drank some water this morning," Lisa said defensively. "That's progress." Jennifer, who had always been gentler than Mike, approached the fence slowly. "He's beautiful underneath all that sadness," she said quietly. "You can see he was once magnificent." Their 6-year-old daughter Amy pressed her face against the fence. "Why won't he look at us, Aunt Lisa?" "He's been hurt, sweetheart. Sometimes when people or animals get really hurt, they need time to remember how to trust again." Mike pulled Lisa aside while Jennifer kept the kids occupied. "I'm worried about you. This horse is costing you money you don't have, and from what? I can see he's not getting better. How long are you going to keep this up?" "I don't know," Lisa admitted. "But I can't give up on him yet. There's something still there, Mike. I can feel it." "Feeling isn't enough to keep an animal alive, Lisa. Sometimes love means letting go." After her family left, Lisa felt more conflicted than ever. She sat on her porch, watching Thunder as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the paddock. He hadn't moved from his corner all day. Despite the visits and conversations, that evening she decided to try a different approach. Instead of staying outside the fence, she entered the paddock with a bucket of warm water and a soft brush. Thunder didn't react to her presence, which she took as permission to get closer. "I'm going to clean you up a little, okay, boy?" she said, moving slowly and deliberately. She started with his neck, gently brushing away the dirt and dried sweat. Thunder's coat was dull and patchy, but underneath she could see hints of the glossy black it had once been. As she worked, she continued talking to him about anything that came to mind. "You know, I found out you used to be a show jumper. That must have been exciting, flying over those big fences. I bet you were incredible to watch." She thought she felt Thunder relax slightly under her touch, but she couldn't be sure. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Lisa would wake early, check on Thunder, talk to him while she did her morning chores, and spend time in the evening, grooming him and sharing her thoughts. The water level in his trough continued to drop slowly, which gave her hope, but he still refused all food. On Wednesday, Dr. Martinez returned for a follow-up visit. He examined Thunder again and shook his head. "He's lost more weight, Lisa. At this rate, he'll be in critical condition within a week or 2. I really think we need to consider more aggressive intervention." "What kind of intervention?" "We could tube feed him to get some nutrition into his system. It's not pleasant for the horse, but it might keep him alive long enough for his appetite to return." Lisa felt sick at the thought of forcing food into Thunder through a tube. "Isn't there any other way?" "We could try some medications that might stimulate his appetite. But honestly, I've seen horses in this condition before, and the outcome is rarely positive." "The kindest thing might be—" "I know what you're going to say, Dr. Martinez. Everyone's been saying it. But I'm not ready to give up on him yet." Dr. Martinez nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "I understand. But please don't wait too long. There comes a point where trying to save them becomes cruel." That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Thunder standing alone in his paddock, slowly fading away despite all her efforts. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went outside to check on him. The night was clear and cold, with a full moon casting everything in silver light. As she approached the paddock, she was surprised to see Thunder in a slightly different position. He had moved maybe 3 feet from his usual corner, which felt like a miracle after days of complete stillness. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" she said softly. To her amazement, Thunder's head turned slightly toward the sound of her voice. It was a small movement, but it was the first time he had acknowledged her presence so directly. Lisa climbed over the fence and sat down in the middle of the paddock, about 10 feet away from Thunder. She didn't try to approach him or touch him. She just sat there in the moonlight, keeping him company. "I know everyone thinks I should give up on you," she whispered. "And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm being selfish, keeping you here when you're suffering. But something tells me you're not ready to give up yet. Am I right?" Thunder didn't respond, but he didn't move away either. For the first time since his arrival, he seemed to be actively listening to her. "I had a horse once when I was a teenager named Star. She had been abused and was terrified of people. My dad wanted to get rid of her because she was too dangerous. But I saw something in her eyes that reminded me of myself back then. I was going through a rough time, feeling like nobody understood me." Lisa pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them for warmth. "I spent months just sitting with Star, not trying to ride her or train her, just being there. People said I was wasting my time, but eventually she started to trust me. It took almost a year, but she became the most loyal, gentle horse I've ever known." She glanced at Thunder, who was still facing her direction. "I'm not saying you're exactly like Star. Every horse is different. But I believe there's still something alive in there, something worth fighting for. Even if everyone else thinks I'm crazy?" Lisa sat with Thunder for another hour before the cold drove her back inside. As she walked toward the house, she thought she heard a soft sound behind her. When she turned around, Thunder was looking directly at her for the first time since she'd brought him home. It was such a small thing, just eye contact lasting a few seconds. But in that moment, Lisa felt a connection that gave her the strength to keep trying. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and more doubt from well-meaning friends and family. But tonight, under the full moon, she had seen a flicker of the spirit that everyone else thought was gone forever. The morning after their moonlight encounter, Lisa woke up feeling more hopeful than she had in weeks. She dressed quickly and hurried out to check on Thunder, half expecting to find him back in his usual corner, motionless as always. Instead, she found him standing near the water trough, his head slightly raised. "Good morning, beautiful," she said softly. Approaching the fence with careful steps, Thunder's ears swiveled toward her voice, and for a brief moment, their eyes met again. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to make Lisa's heart race with excitement. This was real progress, not just her imagination. As she prepared breakfast for her other horses, Lisa noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. Thunder had moved to a different spot in his paddock. He was now standing closer to the fence, maybe 8 feet away from where she worked. It wasn't much, but after weeks of him staying frozen in one corner, any movement felt like a victory. "I see you there, Thunder," she said, without looking directly at him, not wanting to spook him back into his shell. "Curious about what I'm doing?" She continued with her routine, talking to him as she worked. She told him about each of her other horses, their personalities and quirks, making sure to include him in the conversation as if he were already part of the family. "That's Bella over there, the brown mare. She's the boss of everyone, including me sometimes, and the gray gelding is Winston. He thinks he's a lapdog and tries to follow me into the house when I'm not paying attention." As she spoke, Lisa noticed Thunder's ears moving, tracking her voice as she moved around the barn. It was such a small thing, but it meant he was actively listening, engaging with the world around him instead of shutting it out completely. Later that morning, Lisa decided to try something new. Instead of putting Thunder's hay in his usual feeding area, she placed small piles of it at different spots around the paddock. If he was starting to move around, maybe he would investigate and find something that appealed to him. She chose the sweetest smelling hay she had, the kind that usually drove horses crazy with desire. She even added some molasses to make it extra tempting. Then she retreated to the barn and pretended to be busy with other tasks, while secretly watching Thunder from the corner of her eye. For the first hour, nothing happened. Thunder remained in his new position near the fence, apparently uninterested in the food offerings scattered around his space. Lisa tried not to feel disappointed. Progress wasn't always linear, she reminded herself. Then, just as she was starting to lose hope, Thunder took a step. Then another. He was moving toward the nearest pile of hay, his nostrils flaring slightly as he caught the sweet scent. Lisa held her breath, afraid that any sound might break the spell. Thunder lowered his head toward the hay, sniffed it carefully, and then, to Lisa's amazement, took a small bite. It was barely more than a nibble, but it was the first food he had eaten since arriving at her ranch. "Yes," she whispered under her breath, feeling tears of relief spring to her eyes. Thunder chewed slowly, thoughtfully, as if he had forgotten what eating was supposed to feel like. He took another small bite, then lifted his head and looked around, as if making sure it was safe to continue. When nothing threatened him, he lowered his head again and took a few more bites. Lisa wanted to shout with joy, but she forced herself to remain calm and quiet. This was Thunder's moment, and she didn't want to do anything that might set him back over the next few days. Thunder's progress continued in small but meaningful ways. He began eating regularly, though only small amounts at a time. He started drinking more water, and Lisa noticed his coat was beginning to look less dull. More importantly, he was becoming aware of his surroundings. When Lisa worked in the barn, Thunder would position himself where he could watch her. When she talked to her other horses, his ears would perk up, following the conversation. He even started showing interest in Bella and Winston, who grazed in the paddock next to his. "Look at you making friends," Lisa said one afternoon as she watched Thunder standing at the fence line closest to the other horses. "I told you they were good company." Thunder didn't approach the fence where the other horses were, but he watched them with obvious curiosity. Bella, ever the social butterfly, had taken to standing near Thunder's fence during her free time, as if she understood he needed companionship but couldn't quite ask for it yet. Lisa's neighbor Frank stopped by on Thursday, ostensibly to borrow some tools but really to check on Thunder's progress. Lisa could see the surprise on his weathered face when he noticed Thunder standing alert and aware instead of slumped in defeat. "Well, I'll be," Frank said quietly, leaning against the fence. "He looks different." "He's eating now," Lisa said, trying to keep the pride out of her voice. "Not much, but consistently, and he's been moving around the paddock." Frank studied Thunder for a long moment. His eyes looked clearer. Still sad, but not empty like before. He turned to Lisa with something that might have been approval. "You might actually have something here, Lisa. I wasn't sure before, but, well, sometimes I'm wrong." Coming from Frank, this was practically a standing ovation. Lisa felt a warm glow of validation that she hadn't realized she needed so badly. That evening, Lisa decided to try grooming Thunder again. She approached his paddock with her brush kit, moving slowly and announcing her intentions. "I'm coming in to make you pretty, Thunder. Is that okay with you?" To her surprise, Thunder didn't retreat to his corner when she entered the paddock. Instead, he stood his ground, watching her approach with alert but cautious eyes. "Good boy," she murmured, starting with gentle strokes on his neck. "We're going to get you looking like the champion you used to be." As she worked, Lisa could feel Thunder gradually relaxing under her touch. His breathing became deeper and more rhythmic, and after a while, he even lowered his head slightly, as if enjoying the attention. "Dr. Martinez told me you used to be a show jumper," she said as she worked on a particularly tangled section of mane. "I bet you were incredible. All that power and grace, flying over those jumps like you had wings." Thunder's ears flicked back and forth as she spoke, and Lisa could swear she felt a slight shift in his posture, as if the mention of his past had stirred something deep inside him. "Whatever happened to you, boy, it wasn't your fault. Sometimes bad things happen to good horses, just like they happen to good people, but that doesn't mean the story has to end there." As she continued grooming him, Lisa told Thunder about her own struggles with depression after losing her grandfather, the man who had taught her everything about horses. She talked about the dark months when she couldn't bring herself to care about anything, how the horses had been the only thing that could pull her out of bed some days. Healing isn't a straight line, she said, working on Thunder's tail now. Some days are better than others, but as long as you keep trying, keep taking one more breath, one more step, there's always hope for tomorrow to be different. By the time she finished grooming Thunder, his coat had regained some of its natural shine. More importantly, he seemed more present, more connected to the moment. When she stepped back to admire her work, Thunder actually took a step toward her, as if he didn't want the session to end. "Tomorrow we'll work on this again," she promised, reaching out slowly to pat his neck. Thunder allowed the touch, even leaning into it slightly. As Lisa left the paddock that evening, she felt a sense of cautious optimism that had been missing for weeks. Thunder was far from healed, but he was no longer the broken, hopeless animal she had brought home from the auction. He was eating, drinking, moving, and most importantly, connecting with her and the world around him. The road ahead would still be challenging, she knew. There would be setbacks and difficult days, but for the first time since this journey began, Lisa truly believed that Thunder wanted to get better. And sometimes wanting to heal was the first and most important step toward actually doing it. That night, as she sat on her porch looking out at the paddocks, Lisa could see Thunder standing near his fence, no longer hiding in the corner, but actively watching the world around him. It was a small miracle, but it was theirs and it was real. 3 weeks into Thunder's recovery, Lisa felt like they had finally turned a corner. The horse was eating regularly, drinking plenty of water, and had even started approaching the fence when she called his name. His coat was beginning to shine, and there was a spark in his eyes. That hadn't been there when she first brought him home. Then came the storm. Lisa had been checking the weather forecast all week, watching a massive system move across the state toward their valley. The meteorologist on the local news warned of severe thunderstorms, high winds, and possible hail. Lisa spent Tuesday afternoon securing loose items around her property and double-checking that all her animals had adequate shelter. "We're in for a big one tonight, Thunder," she told him as she filled his water trough that evening. "But you'll be safe in your shelter. It's nice and sturdy." Thunder seemed more alert than usual, his ears constantly moving as if he was picking up sounds that Lisa couldn't hear. Horses were often sensitive to changes in weather, and she figured he was just responding to the dropping barometric pressure. The storm hit around midnight with a fury that surprised even Lisa, who had lived through plenty of mountain weather. Thunder and lightning crashed across the sky in an almost continuous display, while rain pounded the roof of her house like bullets. The wind howled through the trees, bending them at impossible angles. Lisa lay in bed listening to the chaos outside, worried about all her animals, but especially Thunder. This was his first major storm since arriving at her ranch, and she had no idea how he might react. She considered going out to check on him, but the lightning was too dangerous to risk it. Around 2 in the morning, a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the entire house. Lisa heard something else mixed in with the sound, a terrified whinny that cut through the storm like a knife. She knew immediately it was Thunder. Against her better judgment, Lisa pulled on her rain gear and grabbed a flashlight. She had to fight against the wind just to get her front door open, and the rain soaked through her jacket within seconds. The ground was already turning to mud under her feet as she made her way toward the paddocks. When she reached Thunder's area, her heart sank. The gate to his paddock was standing wide open, banging in the wind. Thunder was nowhere to be seen. "Thunder!" she called, though her voice was barely audible over the storm. "Thunder, where are you?" Lisa swept her flashlight beam across the empty paddock, looking for any sign of where he might have gone. Near his shelter, she spotted dark stains on the wooden posts that looked like blood. Her stomach dropped as she realized Thunder must have injured himself trying to escape. She searched the immediate area, calling his name and following muddy hoofprints that quickly disappeared in the driving rain. The lightning made it dangerous to venture too far from the buildings, but Lisa couldn't bear the thought of Thunder lost and hurt somewhere in the storm. After an hour of searching, she had to admit defeat. Thunder was gone, and there was nothing she could do until morning. Lisa returned to her house, soaked and shivering, and spent the rest of the night staring out her window, praying that Thunder would find somewhere safe to ride out the storm. Dawn came gray and wet, with the storm finally moving on but leaving behind a landscape of fallen branches and standing water. Lisa was outside before the sun was fully up, beginning a systematic search of her property and the surrounding area. She found Thunder about a quarter-mile from the ranch, huddled under a grove of pine trees near the creek. He was standing with his head hanging low, blood visible on his shoulder and front legs where he had scraped himself against something during his panicked flight. "Oh, Thunder," Lisa whispered, approaching him slowly. "What did you do to yourself?" Thunder lifted his head when he heard her voice, but instead of the recognition she had grown accustomed to, his eyes held the same vacant, hopeless expression she remembered from the auction. It was as if all the progress they had made together had been erased in one terrible night. "It's okay, boy. The storm is over. You're safe now." But Thunder shrank away from her outstretched hand, backing against the trees as if he didn't recognize her at all. The trust they had built so carefully over the past week seemed to have vanished completely. Lisa spent 2 hours coaxing Thunder back to the ranch. Every step was a struggle, as he balked and resisted, clearly terrified of everything around him. By the time they reached his paddock, both Lisa and Thunder were exhausted. Dr. Martinez arrived within an hour of Lisa's call. His examination revealed that Thunder's physical injuries were minor, some scrapes and bruises, but nothing that wouldn't heal. The emotional damage, however, was far more serious. "It's like he's back where he started," Dr. Martinez said quietly, as they watched Thunder standing motionless in the corner of his paddock. "Sometimes a traumatic event can undo months of progress in a single night." "But he was doing so well," Lisa said, fighting back tears. "He was eating, responding to me, even letting me groom him. How can it all just disappear?" "Trauma is complicated, Lisa. Whatever happened to him before he came to you, that storm probably triggered all those memories. The thunder, the feeling of being trapped, the fear, it all came rushing back." Lisa watched Thunder standing statue still, just like the day she had brought him home. He hadn't touched his food or water since returning from the creek. His eyes had gone dead again, staring at nothing. "What do I do now?" she asked. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, this might be harder than starting over. Sometimes when an animal regresses this severely, they lose the ability to trust again. The neural pathways that were forming the progress he was making, a shock like this can damage all of that." Over the next few days, Lisa tried everything she could think of. She sat with Thunder for hours, talking to him just like in the beginning. She offered him his favorite treats, tried gentle grooming, even played soft music near his paddock. Nothing worked. Thunder remained as unresponsive as a statue. Frank stopped by on Friday and shook his head sadly when he saw Thunder's condition. "I'm sorry, Lisa. I was starting to believe he might make it, but this ... He gestured toward Thunder's motionless form. "This doesn't look good." Lisa's mother called that weekend, having heard about the storm from other family members. "Honey, maybe this is a sign," she said gently. "Maybe you've done everything you could, and it's time to let him go peacefully." Even Rachel, who had been Lisa's strongest supporter, seemed worried when she visited on Sunday. "I hate to say this, but he looks worse than when you first brought him home. At least then there was a chance he was just adjusting. Now, Now." "What?" Lisa asked, though she could see the answer in her friend's eyes. "Now it looks like he's given up completely." That evening, Lisa sat on her porch watching Thunder in the fading light. He hadn't moved from his corner all day. The small pile of hay she had placed nearby remained untouched. And she was pretty sure he hadn't drunk any water either. All the doubt and criticism that had surrounded her decision to rescue Thunder came flooding back, but now it felt heavier because she had tasted hope and lost it. For a few precious weeks, she had believed that love and patience could heal even the deepest wounds. Now she wondered if she had been naive and foolish. Her phone rang, interrupting her dark thoughts. It was Dr. Martinez. "Lisa, I've been thinking about Thunder all day. I know this is hard to hear, but I think we need to seriously consider euthanasia. If he's not eating or drinking, and if he's not responding to any stimuli, then we're looking at a slow, painful decline. I don't think that's fair to him or to you. Lisa stared out at Thunder's motionless silhouette in the growing darkness. How long do I have to decide? If he doesn't start eating by Monday, I think we'll need to make the call. I'm sorry, Lisa. I know how much you've invested in him, both emotionally and financially. But sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let them go. After hanging up, Lisa walked out to Thunder's paddock one more time. The night was clear and calm, nothing like the terrible storm that had destroyed all their progress. Thunder stood in his corner like a shadow, completely disconnected from the world around him. I don't know if you can hear me, Thunder, she whispered, but I need you to fight. I can't do this alone anymore. If there's any part of you that wants to try again, please show me. Because if you've really given up, then maybe everyone is right. Maybe the kindest thing would be to let you rest. Thunder didn't respond. He didn't even flick an ear in her direction. As Lisa walked back to her house, she felt the weight of an impossible decision settling on her shoulders. Tomorrow was Sunday. Monday, she would have to choose between hope and mercy, between fighting for a dream and accepting a heartbreaking reality. Sunday passed like a funeral. Lisa went through the motions of caring for her other horses, but her heart wasn't in it. Every few minutes she found herself glancing toward Thunder's paddock, hoping against hope to see some sign of life, some flicker of the progress they had lost. But Thunder remained frozen in his corner, a living statue that seemed to be slowly fading away. That evening, Lisa made the hardest phone call of her life. Dr. Martinez? It's Lisa, I think you're right. If Thunder isn't any better tomorrow morning, we should probably... She couldn't finish the sentence. I understand, Lisa. I'll be there around 9 o'clock. Try to get some sleep tonight. Sleep was impossible. Lisa tossed and turned, her mind racing between memories of Thunder's brief improvement and the crushing reality of his current state. Around midnight, she gave up and made herself a cup of tea. Sitting at her kitchen table and staring out the window toward the paddocks, the moon was nearly full, casting everything in pale silver light. She could just make out Thunder's dark form in his usual corner, as motionless as always. Lisa had never felt so helpless in her entire life. At some point, she must have dozed off at the table because she was startled awake by the sound of her alarm clock. 5:30 in the morning. In 3.5 hours, Dr. Martinez would arrive, and she would have to make the final decision about Thunder's fate. Lisa dressed slowly, putting off the inevitable moment when she would have to face Thunder and see that nothing had changed. She made coffee with shaking hands and stood at her kitchen sink, working up the courage to go outside. When she finally opened her front door, the crisp morning air hit her face like a slap. The sun was just beginning to rise behind the mountains, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. It was going to be a beautiful day, which somehow made everything feel worse. Lisa walked slowly toward the barn, her feet crunching on the frost-covered grass. She had decided to feed her other horses first, to delay the heartbreak of seeing Thunder's unchanged condition. But as she rounded the corner of the barn, she stopped dead in her tracks. Thunder was standing at the gate of his paddock, his head raised and alert. It was the first time in days that she had seen him anywhere but his corner, and for a moment Lisa wondered if she was still dreaming. Thunder? She called softly, afraid that speaking would break whatever spell had brought him to the gate. To her amazement, Thunder's ears pricked forward at the sound of his name. He took a step closer to the fence, then another. When Lisa approached slowly, Thunder didn't retreat. Instead, he stretched his neck toward her, and she heard something that made her heart skip a beat. Thunder nickered softly, a gentle rumbling sound deep in his chest. It was the first vocalization she had heard from him since the night of the storm, and it was directed at her, a greeting between friends. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered, reaching out carefully to touch Thunder's nose. "He?" allowed the contact, even pushing gently against her hand. "Where did you come from, beautiful? What happened to you?" But that wasn't the most surprising thing she discovered that morning. As Lisa looked around Thunder's paddock, she noticed something that made her blink in confusion. The hay bales that had been scattered around the enclosure were now arranged in a neat row along one fence. The water trough had been pushed to a different position, closer to the gate. Even the loose boards from Thunder's shelter had been moved and stacked in an organized pile. "Did you do this?" Lisa asked, staring at Thunder in amazement. When did you ... Thunder watched her with bright, alert eyes as she examined his handiwork. It was impossible, but there was no other explanation. Somehow, during the night, Thunder had rearranged his entire paddock. The work showed intelligence, purpose, and most importantly, a connection to the world around him that had been completely absent for days. Lisa's hands trembled as she opened the gate and entered the paddock. Thunder stood his ground, allowing her to approach without fear. When she reached out to stroke his neck, he leaned into her touch, seeking comfort and connection. "You've been busy, haven't you, boy? Were you trying to help? Were you trying to show me something?" As if in answer, Thunder walked over to where she had placed his morning hay and began to eat. Not the tentative nibbling she had seen before his setback, but purposeful, hungry eating. He was back, really back, and somehow even more present than he had been before the storm. Lisa sank down onto a hay bale, overwhelmed by relief and amazement. Thunder continued eating, occasionally lifting his head to look at her as if checking to make sure she was still there. The trust between them hadn't just returned. It seemed stronger than ever. "I have to call Dr. Martinez," Lisa said, pulling out her phone with shaking fingers. The veterinarian answered on the first ring. "Lisa? I'm just getting ready to head over." "How are you holding up?" "Dr. Martinez, you're not going to believe this. Thunder is... he's completely different. He's alert, he's eating, he even reorganized his entire paddock somehow. I don't know how to explain it, but he's back." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Lisa, are you sure?" "Yesterday he was completely unresponsive. Horses don't just snap out of severe depression overnight." "I know how it sounds, but you have to see this for yourself. He's not just better, he's extraordinary. Please, just come and look at him before we make any decisions." Dr. Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, his expression skeptical, but curious. The moment he saw Thunder, his demeanor changed completely. The horse stood alert and dignified at the fence, watching their approach with intelligent eyes. "This is incredible," Dr. Martinez murmured, entering the paddock for a closer examination. "His posture, his muscle tone, even his breathing is completely different. And you say he moved all this himself?" Lisa nodded, still hardly believing it herself. "I found him like this when I came out this morning. Everything was rearranged, and he was standing at the gate like he was waiting for me." Dr. Martinez conducted a thorough examination while Thunder stood patiently, cooperating in a way he never had before. When the vet finished, he shook his head in amazement. "I've been treating animals for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It's as if something switched on in his brain overnight. Not just recovery, but enhancement. He's more alert and responsive than most healthy horses I work with." As they watched, Thunder walked over to his water trough and drank deeply, then returned to his hay pile to continue eating. But he kept one ear turned toward Lisa and Dr. Martinez, clearly aware of their conversation. "What do you think happened?" Lisa asked. "Honestly, I have no idea. Sometimes trauma can work in mysterious ways. Maybe the storm that set him back also forced him to confront whatever was holding him prisoner in his own mind. Maybe arranging his space gave him a sense of control he'd never had before." Dr. Martinez paused, studying Thunder's intelligent expression. "Or maybe he was trying to communicate with you the only way he knew how. Animals are more aware than we give them credit for. Maybe he sensed what was supposed to happen this morning and decided to show you that he wasn't ready to give up." Thunder approached the fence where they stood and gently bumped Lisa's shoulder with his nose, as if agreeing with the doctor's assessment. "So what happens now?" Lisa asked, stroking Thunder's neck. "Now we see what he's capable of. This level of intelligence and awareness is extraordinary. I'd like to contact a colleague of mine who specializes in equine behavior. I think Thunder might be able to help other animals, maybe even people." As Dr. Martinez packed up his equipment, Thunder followed them around the paddock, clearly not, wanting the interaction to end. When Lisa left to walk the doctor to his truck, Thunder whinnied softly, a sound full of affection and trust. "Take good care of him," Dr. Martinez said as he climbed into his truck. "I have a feeling Thunder is going to surprise us all." Lisa returned to the paddock, where Thunder was waiting by the gate. As she approached, he nickered again, that gentle greeting that spoke of friendship and understanding. "We did it, didn't we, boy? We made it through the darkness together?" Thunder rested his head against her shoulder, and Lisa felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months. The journey wasn't over, but they had crossed the most dangerous territory together. Whatever came next, they would face it as partners, horse and human, united by a bond that had been tested by trauma and emerged stronger than ever. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the earth and chasing away the last of the morning frost. In Thunder's paddock, a remarkable animal stood alert and alive, ready to discover what amazing things the future might hold. The week following Thunder's miraculous recovery was unlike anything Lisa had ever experienced. Every morning brought new surprises that challenged everything she thought she knew about horses. Thunder wasn't just healthy again. He was demonstrating abilities that seemed almost impossible. On Tuesday morning, Lisa discovered that Thunder had somehow opened the latch on his grain bin and distributed small piles of feed to precise locations around his paddock. Not scattered randomly, but placed strategically where the morning sun would keep them warm and dry. When she examined the latch, she found it required lifting a metal piece while simultaneously sliding a bolt. It was a complex mechanism that most horses couldn't master even with training. "How did you figure that out?" Lisa asked, watching Thunder watch her with those intelligent dark eyes. "And more importantly, why did you organize everything so perfectly?" Thunder tilted his head slightly as if considering her question, then walked over to demonstrate. He used his lips and teeth to lift the latch mechanism, holding it while he pushed the bolt with his nose. The motion was deliberate and practiced, not the fumbling of an animal acting on instinct. Dr. Martinez had recommended a colleague named Dr. Peterson, an animal behaviorist from the State University. When Lisa called to describe what she was witnessing, Dr. Peterson's initial response was skeptical. "Horses can learn to open simple latches," she explained over the phone. "But the behavior you're describing sounds more like problem-solving than learned response." "I'd need to observe him directly to make any real assessment." Dr. Peterson arrived on Thursday with a graduate student and a box full of testing equipment. She was a serious woman in her 50s, with the kind of scientific demeanor that suggested she didn't believe in anything she couldn't measure and document. "Let's start with some basic intelligence tests," she said, setting up what looked like a puzzle box in Thunder's paddock. "This requires the animal to move 3 separate pieces in the correct sequence to access a treat." Lisa watched nervously as Thunder approached the device. Most horses would sniff it, maybe paw at it randomly, and then lose interest. Thunder studied it for nearly a minute, walking around it from different angles before making his first move. He solved it in under 3 minutes. "Interesting," Dr. Peterson murmured, making notes. "Let's try something more challenging." The second test involved a series of ropes and pulleys that required specific actions in a particular order. Thunder observed Dr. Peterson setting it up, his ears forward and alert. When she stepped back, he immediately went to work. Not only did Thunder solve the puzzle, but he did it faster than Dr. Peterson's previous test subject, a border collie that was considered exceptionally intelligent. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Peterson said quietly to Lisa. "I've tested hundreds of animals, and I've never seen cognitive abilities like this in a horse. His problem-solving skills are off the charts." But Thunder's intelligence wasn't limited to puzzles. That afternoon, something happened that left everyone speechless. Lisa had been working with Bella, her older mare, in the training ring when Bella suddenly went lame. The horse pulled up short, favoring her left front leg and clearly in pain. Lisa immediately called Dr. Martinez, but he was dealing with an emergency at another ranch and couldn't arrive for several hours. As Lisa led Bella slowly back toward the barn, she noticed Thunder standing at his fence, watching intently. His posture was alert, almost urgent, and he began pacing along the fence line as they approached. "What's wrong with you, Thunder?" Lisa asked, puzzled by his agitation. Thunder whinnied sharply, then did something extraordinary. He walked to the corner of his paddock where Lisa kept some of her medical supplies and began pawing at a specific box. When Lisa approached, she saw he was indicating the container where she stored leg wraps and cold packs. "Are you trying to tell me something about Bella's leg?" she asked, feeling slightly ridiculous for talking to him like he could understand. Complex concepts. Thunder nickered softly and nodded his head, a clear yes gesture that made Lisa's heart skip a beat. She opened the medical kit and pulled out an instant cold pack. Thunder watched approvingly, then walked to his water trough and splashed water with his nose, making it clear that Bella needed both cold treatment and hydration. When Dr. Martinez finally arrived and examined Bella, he confirmed what Thunder had somehow diagnosed: a strained tendon that required cold therapy and rest. The treatment Thunder had indicated was exactly what the veterinarian prescribed. How did he know? Dr. Martinez asked, looking at Thunder with new respect. Horses don't typically show empathy for other horses' medical conditions, and they certainly don't recommend treatments. Dr. Peterson, who had stayed to observe this interaction, was frantically taking notes. "This goes beyond intelligence," she said. "This is showing emotional intelligence, diagnostic ability, and communication skills that I've never documented in any animal." The next morning brought an even more remarkable discovery. Lisa woke up to find that Thunder had escaped from his paddock again, but this time it wasn't from fear or panic. Following the muddy hoofprints, she found him in the paddock with her newest rescue, a young Mari named Rose, who had arrived just 2 days earlier. Rose was severely traumatized, having been rescued from an abusive situation. She hadn't eaten since arriving and spent most of her time pressed against the far fence, trembling at any human approach. Dr. Martinez had warned Lisa that Rose might not survive if she didn't start eating soon. But this morning, Lisa found Thunder standing calmly beside Rose, who was actually eating hay for the first time since her arrival. Not only that, but Thunder had somehow arranged the hay in small, non-threatening piles around the paddock, creating multiple eating stations so Rose wouldn't feel trapped in any corner. "How did you get in here?" Lisa wondered aloud, examining the gate. The latch was intact, but somehow Thunder had opened it without damaging anything. As Lisa watched, Thunder gently nudged Rose toward a water trough, encouraging her to drink. When Rose showed signs of anxiety, Thunder would position himself between her and whatever was frightening her, creating a shield of calm protection. Dr. Peterson arrived within an hour of Lisa's call, bringing additional equipment and 2 more colleagues. What they witnessed over the next several hours changed their understanding of animal intelligence completely. Thunder seemed to intuitively understand Rose's trauma and tailored his behavior accordingly. When she was frightened, he remained perfectly still until she calmed down. When she showed interest in food, he would eat alongside her, demonstrating that it was safe. Most remarkably, when Rose had a panic attack triggered by a sudden noise, Thunder immediately moved to comfort her, using his body language and soft vocalizations to bring her back to a calm state. "This is therapeutic behavior," one of Dr. Peterson's colleagues whispered. "He's providing emotional support at a level I've seen in trained therapy animals, but he's doing it instinctively." By evening, Rose was not only eating regularly, but had begun to relax in Thunder's presence. The transformation was so dramatic that Dr. Martinez could hardly believe it was the same horse he had examined 2 days earlier. Thunder seems to have an extraordinary ability to read other animals' emotional states and respond appropriately, Dr. Peterson explained to Lisa. "This kind of emotional intelligence is rare even in humans. In a horse, it's virtually unprecedented." As the scientists packed up their equipment, Lisa stood watching Thunder and Rose graze peacefully together. Thunder would occasionally lift his head to check on the younger Mare, ready to provide comfort if needed. "What happens now?" Lisa asked Dr. Peterson. "Now we document everything carefully and consider how Thunder's abilities might be used to help other animals. What you have here isn't just a recovered horse." Lisa, you have an animal with gifts that could change the way we understand healing and trauma recovery. That night, as Lisa sat on her porch reflecting on the day's revelations, she could see Thunder standing alert in Rose's paddock, keeping watch over his new charge. The broken horse she had rescued from an auction had not only healed himself, but had become a healer for others. The journey that had begun with mockery and doubt had led to something miraculous. Thunder wasn't just surviving. He was thriving, in ways that defied explanation. And Lisa realized that his story was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. 6 months after Thunder's breakthrough, Lisa's small ranch had transformed into something she never could have imagined. Word of Thunder's extraordinary abilities had spread beyond the scientific community, reaching people who desperately needed hope for their own healing journeys. The first call came from a woman named Janet, whose teenage daughter had been struggling with severe anxiety and depression following a car accident. Traditional therapy wasn't working, and Janet had heard about experimental programs using horses to help trauma victims. "I know it sounds crazy," Janet said over the phone, "but we've tried everything else. My daughter hasn't spoken more than a few words in months. The doctors say she's lost the will to connect with anyone." Lisa looked out at Thunder, who was calmly grazing with Rose, now a confident and healthy mare thanks to his patient guidance. "It doesn't sound crazy at all," she replied. "When can you bring her?" 16-year-old Megan arrived the following Tuesday, a thin, pale girl who seemed to fold in on herself whenever adults tried to engage her. She sat in her mother's car for 20 minutes before reluctantly agreeing to walk around the ranch. Her eyes were downcast, her shoulders hunched, and she reminded Lisa painfully of Thunder during those first dark weeks. Thunder noticed Megan immediately. From across the paddock, he lifted his head and watched her with the same intense focus. Lisa had seen him use with Rose. Without being asked or led, Thunder walked slowly to the fence closest to where Megan stood. "He's beautiful," Megan whispered. The first words she had spoken since arriving. Thunder stood perfectly still as Megan approached the fence, his dark eyes gentle and patient. When she reached out tentatively to touch his nose, Thunder leaned into her hand, accepting the contact with quiet dignity. For the next hour, Megan sat by Thunder's fence while he grazed nearby, occasionally approaching to rest his head near her shoulder. She didn't say much, but Lisa could see some of the tension leaving the girl's posture. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Megan asked as they prepared to leave. Within 2 weeks, Megan was visiting daily after school. Thunder seemed to instinctively understand what she needed each day. If she arrived upset or agitated, he would remain calm and still until she relaxed. If she seemed withdrawn, he would gently engage her in simple activities like brushing his coat or helping him organize his paddock. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. Megan began talking more, first to Thunder, then to Lisa, and eventually to her mother and therapist. She started eating regular meals again and sleeping through the night. Most importantly, she began to smile. "It's like he can see into her soul," Janet told Lisa one afternoon as they watched Megan laughing while Thunder playfully nudged her pocket looking for treats. "He knows exactly what she needs, moment by moment." Dr. Peterson had been documenting Thunder's interactions with both animals and humans, and the results were remarkable. Thunder demonstrated an ability to assess emotional states, adjust his behavior accordingly, and provide exactly the right type of comfort or challenge that each individual needed. Word of Thunder's success with Megan reached Dr. Roberts, who ran a program for troubled youth at a nearby residential facility. She called Lisa with an unusual request. "We have a group of kids who have been through severe trauma," Dr. Roberts explained. "Traditional therapy helps, but they're all struggling to trust adults. I've heard that your horse has an extraordinary ability to connect with people who are hurting." Lisa agreed to bring Thunder to the facility for a trial session. She was nervous about how he would react to being away from his familiar environment, but Thunder seemed to understand the importance of their mission. He loaded into the trailer calmly and stood quietly during the drive. The group of 8 teenagers, who gathered in the facility's outdoor area, looked skeptical and guarded. Most had been through multiple failed placements and had learned not to expect much from adults who promise to help them. Thunder was led into the center of the group and simply stood there, asking nothing from anyone. After a few minutes, a tough-looking boy named Tyler approached cautiously. "He's huge," Tyler said, trying to sound unimpressed but unable to hide his fascination. Thunder lowered his head slightly, making himself less intimidating, and waited. Tyler reached out to touch Thunder's neck, and something shifted in his expression. "He's so warm," Tyler said quietly. "And his heart is beating really fast. Is he scared of us?" "Maybe he's excited to meet you," Lisa suggested, over the next hour. Each teenager had their own interaction with Thunder. Some were brief and tentative, others longer and more involved. Thunder seemed to read each young person perfectly, offering exactly the right amount of engagement for their comfort level. A quiet girl named Amy, who had barely spoken since arriving at the facility, spent 20 minutes simply leaning against Thunder's side while he stood perfectly still. When she finally stepped back, there were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. "He makes me feel safe," she whispered to Dr. Roberts. The session was so successful that Dr. Roberts asked Lisa to return weekly. Within a month, Thunder was working with multiple groups, and the staff was documenting improvements in the participants that exceeded anything they had seen with traditional therapy alone. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Thunder's reputation continued to grow. Veterinarians began referring clients with traumatized horses, and consistently, Thunder was able to help where other methods had failed. He worked with a racehorse who had developed crippling anxiety, a pony who had been abused and wouldn't trust humans, and even a wild Mustang who had been injured and needed to learn to accept medical care. Frank, Lisa's neighbor who had once predicted Thunder's failure, became one of his biggest advocates. He brought his own grandson, a boy with autism who struggled with social connections, to meet Thunder. The bond that formed between them was immediate and profound. "I owe you an apology," Frank told Lisa one evening as they watched Thunder gently interacting with his grandson. "I was wrong about that horse. About what was possible. You saw something the rest of us missed." The local newspaper ran a feature story about Thunder's work, which was picked up by regional and then national media. Reporters, researchers, and animal lovers from across the country began making pilgrimages to Lisa's small ranch to witness Thunder's abilities firsthand. A documentary crew spent a week filming Thunder's interactions with various people and animals. The resulting film, titled The Healer, won several awards and brought even more attention to the incredible horse who had once been written off as hopeless. But for Lisa, the most meaningful vindication came from the individuals whose lives Thunder had touched. The thank you letters from parents whose children had found hope again. The updates from Dr. Roberts about teenagers who had learned to trust and were thriving in their new placements. The reports from veterinarians about horses who had healed not just physically but emotionally under Thunder's guidance. One evening, as Lisa sat on her porch watching Thunder work with a group of children from a local grief counseling program, her phone rang. It was the original auction house where she had bought Thunder. "Lisa, this is Pete from Mountain View Livestock. I've been hearing stories about that horse you bought from us last year. Is it true what they're saying about him?" Lisa smiled, watching Thunder gently encourage a shy little girl to brush his mane. "What are they saying?" "That he's some kind of miracle worker. That he can heal broken hearts and minds. I have to tell you, when you bought him that day, I thought you were making a terrible mistake." "Everyone did, and now?" Pete was quiet for a moment. "Now I'm wondering if maybe that horse chose you as much as you chose him. Maybe he was just waiting for someone who believed in second chances." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Lisa reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. The broken horse that everyone had wanted to give up on had become a beacon of hope for countless others facing their own darkness. Thunder had taught her that healing wasn't always about fixing what was broken. Sometimes it was about discovering strengths that trauma had hidden, gifts that could only emerge through the process of overcoming pain. He had shown her that every being, no matter how damaged they might seem, carries within them the potential for extraordinary purpose. Thunder, lifted his head from where he was standing with the children and looked directly at Lisa across the paddock. In his dark eyes, she saw not just intelligence and compassion, but gratitude. They had saved each other, she realized. Her faith in him had awakened his gifts, and his gifts had given her life meaning beyond anything she had ever dreamed possible. The mockery and doubt that had once surrounded her decision to rescue Thunder had been replaced by wonder and respect. But more importantly, countless lives had been touched, healed, and transformed by a horse who had never forgotten how to hope, even in his darkest moments. Thunder's story had become a testament to the power of compassion, patience, and the unshakable belief that every life has value and purpose, no matter how broken it might appear.